Twinkle Sim Racing here. Today we're going to talk tuning, specifically related to the 1993 Impreza. However, this tuning tutorial guide tips could easily be applied to each of these cars. We're going to talk through an understanding of mine where I've been prompting Claude AI and asking it specific questions, and there's a lot of sources. So I'd like to give credit where it's due, but I'm going to be super honest, and I'm going to say that AI can be a rabbit hole, and sometimes I just continue to ask questions and I don't check the sources. So if anybody has mentioned any of this, I'm incredibly sorry, and I will give credit where credit is due. I'm only organizing this information in a way that helps my brain understand it and make it make sense. And I thought that maybe it would be helpful for others to hear how my brain has made sense of tuning and how I've learned tuning since the birth of AC Rally. So, with that in mind, yes, go to the snow rally circuit, run laps. That's how you're going to better understand how to tune these cars. Run laps. You're not thinking 3 right, what do I do? You're able to just zone into the car and understand how each tick impacts the reaction of the car or how the car is functioning. You are going to understand tuning much better running laps. You won't have like a downward hairpin or an upward hairpin, but you have the same turns that you've learned over and over again, and it's repetitive. So you're able to zone in on, am I losing too much stability? Am I getting too much tire contact loss? And you can actually dial the car in a little better. I got 20th while doing this. So I figured, okay, I think I'm understanding what's going on with the car and I should share. The reason that we're not actually into the tuning section yet is because I'd like to start off here just to say, take a second, spend a little time, look through the stats of the car. We have an inline 4, max power 300 horsepower at 5,500 RPM, but we have a max torque at 4,000 RPM. We have a max torque at 4,000 RPM. Okay, and that's important. We're going to talk about that later. So, all right, we've looked at the main components. It's 4-wheel drive. Okay. Kind of. And 6 gears, we have 360 degrees of steering. We're going to select the car. And we're going to start the session and go into the tuning section. Car service, car setup. Oh, I'm going to have to go load my test snow. Load it. Okay. Great. The car is sideways. Let's talk about the car. Let's talk about one general rule of thumb that I've learned in all of my tuning across all different games. Pay attention to where the engine is positioned within the car. Right now we have an engine that's over the front axle. What does that mean when we talk about weight distribution? That means that most of the weight of this car is distributed to the front. We have probably a 60% bias to the front for our weight distribution when the car is level. And I say when the car is level because that's important. Remember, when the car is level, its natural weight distribution is around 60%. This impacts a few different things, and we'll talk about each of them individually. The first thing you want to consider is your brake bias. I have more weight in the front, right? So what that means is the front tires have more weight over them and they have more grip. The rear tires have less weight over them, they have less grip. Therefore, you can move your brake bias to the front of this car because the weight is distributed more towards the front. The second thing is suspension bias. You now know that you have more weight over the front of the car, and less weight over the rear. So the car's suspension and dampening needs tuned to accommodate this. You may have a little higher settings and ratings for spring stiffness and dampening, in the front than you do the rear, because the front has the engine over the axle and it has a lot more weight or momentum to fight. And lastly, aero bias. Now, when I say aero bias, this car doesn't have a front lip and it doesn't have a wing that we can increase angle. So what does aero bias even mean when we're talking about a car like this? And that's a great question. You will still have aero dynamic pressure or aero down pressure on your car. So what is going to change this aero down pressure on this car is actually going to be from your ride height between the front and the rear. So if you think about this car, you'll notice that the front by default has more height than the rear. So when we're looking at the car from the side, the front is higher than the rear. Now this is intentional, and it's intentional for a few different reasons. And I'll explain it, and hopefully it makes sense by the end. You have more energy to fight, so the suspension in the front needs a little bit more travel to fight the weight of the engine. I left off on aerodynamics. When the front is higher than the rear, the front is experiencing most of the aero downforce in relation to the rear, so it's going to help keep the front a little bit more planted. Now, what happens when the front is higher than the rear? Well, now we have a backwards lean in the car. And now that this 60% or 65% weight distribution gets to shift back to 60 to 55% weight distribution. That's when the car isn't under load. When the car is under throttle, the rear drops down farther and you get back to, like, I don't know, between 50 and 55%, let's just say, just for the sake of argument, for explaining this physics and what's going on. So why that's important is because naturally this car wants to sit at like 60, 65%. So now the rear's down lower. When you apply the brake, this rear and come off of having torque applied to the rear to compress the suspension in the rear, what's going to happen is the rear's going to snap up and it's going to throw weight over the front of the tires to like 60, 65, maybe 70%. And that weight is going to cause those tires to dig in and cut through the gravel or the loose surface and cause bite in or help your turning capability. So you want this snap up from the rear and you want it to lean forward. Now, you may think, well, okay, if I want that to happen, then I need to have the rear ride height higher than the front, because then naturally the car wants to be leaned forward, and when it comes out of acceleration, it's going to pop up. The answer here is no. You've just created rake. You've created more aero downforce in the rear. So now you have aero downforce keeping the car level, fighting the rear from bouncing up and transferring weight. You're going to fly out of corners if you do that. I promise you. So those are the three main points. You have brake bias, suspension bias, and you have aero bias. And in order to adjust your aero bias, you need to think about how the ride height is between the front and the back and what it's going to do, how it's going to increase your front aero down pressure as opposed to your rear, and what you might be fighting when you're trying to get the car to transfer weight and turn for you. Okay, so those are three main points when you're thinking about a car before you even start tuning. Where's the engine at? Where's the weight distribution? Then think about those three things. Ride height between front and back. In order to manipulate that weight transfer that I need for the front tires to bite in, the brake bias I need for the front tires to be able to bite, and they have way more grip if they have way more weight over them, so therefore I can apply way more pressure and they won't lock up. And then you have suspension bias, I think. Those are the three. So let's move over to wheels, because wheels is the next most important thing here. Wheels, I've noticed with my SimHub dashboard, I've got a little Amazon Fire tablet for $160 that I use. I love it. I have lovely dashboards that display, and they display for me the tire PSI, the rotor temperature, the wheel temperature, stuff like that. And I've noticed that the tire pressure is not increasing, or the tires are not heating up, increasing the tire pressure to optimal running tire pressure. Now, if you do some research and look into rally cars, you'll see that 32 PSI is generally recommended for a rally tire, and that what they say is it will heat up to its optimal running pressure. It will heat up to its optimal running pressure. So when I've been running these 6-minute stages and whatnot, there's been no change to the tire PSI. This means if you by default leave your tires at 32 PSI, you're not going to be running them at the optimal PSI range. You need to look out for this. Once this is updated, you're going to have to come back here and then readjust your tires for them heating. So let's dig into it a little bit further, right? Okay, so I have 36 PSI in the front and 34 in the rear. The front has more weight over it. We've talked about this. That weight is going to compress the tires further. Now, when we're talking about tire grip and we're talking about loose surfaces, the first thing we need to think about is that there is an inverse relationship. When your tires get taller and narrower, they work more like skis. For turning and cornering grip, you want more narrower tires in the front. When your tires get wider, they are better for forward acceleration. Think about a snowmobile or Arctic Cat. It doesn't have narrow tires in the back that make it go fast. It's got a wide track. That's the general rule of thumb when you're thinking about loose surfaces. It changes when you're thinking about tarmac. But for loose surfaces, you have an inverse relationship. When the tire gets wider, I increase my forward acceleration, but I lose cornering grip. Okay? So naturally, by default, I want my front tires to act more like skis, so I have them 2 PSI higher than the rear. And I've ticked them the rear up 2 and then, the front up 4 because I'm trying to get closer to the optimal running range. That's the main thing to think about with these tires and what's going on. So then camber, I have a little more camber in the front than I do the rear. This is to help me when the weight is transferring through the car and the car's under high load and I'm under in a corner sideways. It's going to help maintain tire contact. And I have more in the front than the rear because it has the engine pushing down on it. Toe out. AC rally, it would be super helpful. I'm going to take a little sidebar here. It would be super, super helpful if you were to just take this slider and put it in the middle and then put toe out on one side and toe in on the other side, and do that for a lot of these. It could be like increase pressure, decrease pressure, whatever. I am tired of trying to read through this description, which doesn't tell me what happens when I click it one way or the other. In my mind, I always have a mental relapse and I think that toe out is positive. So I put toe out in the front and I end up fighting it for days. And then I realize it's negative. Anyway, toe out's negative. What toe out is going to do is it's going to help with the tire bite in to corners, and it's going to help with your cornering stability when you get sideways. So if you're getting sideways a little bit and it feels like the front's not able to roll and it's slowing you down and you're just spinning out, then you want a little bit more toe out so the tires have an easier time rolling, because when you have the steering locked, they're going to be more inclined to roll. So moving down here, I've already kind of explained the gist of it. A little bit less camber. We have less weight back there, a little bit less PSI. We have less weight back there. Toe, I have a little bit of toe in. You never want to have the same amount of toe in as you have toe out in the front, because they're just going to fight themselves equally, and all you're doing is creating friction, slowing the car down. All you're doing is creating friction, slowing the car down, because the car could do the exact same thing without toe out and toe in. The car can do the exact same thing without any toe out or toe in. When you have equal toe out and toe in, the car, it's just like having no toe out or toe in. The car is going to be fighting to be straight, and it's going to fight itself. But if you don't have enough toe in the rear, what happens is the rear gets way squirrely when you get on the throttle. But if you have some toe in when you get on the throttle, it's going to force the car to go straight like a rocket. That's all you need to know there. So let's get back to the gearbox. In the beginning, when we were looking at this car and where its peak horsepower was, where its peak torque is, we noticed that it has peak torque at 4,000 RPM. One big mistake I've always made with some of these cars is I like to hear them revving and in their higher RPM range. And that's a problem. Remember, the max torque for this car is at 4,000 RPM. So if I'm shifting and I'm only hitting 5,000 to 6,000 RPM, I'm completely missing the peak torque of the car. I'm completely missing the peak torque of the car. So when you're shifting, you want that needle to be going down to around and hovering around 4,000 RPM because that's where your max torque is for digging out of corners. So adjust your gearbox accordingly, and it might not be 4. So don't come over here and just follow exactly what I have because it might not be 4, and it relates to the differentials later and how you have the differentials set up. So I might have slightly different differentials, which is why I have 4, and it just kind of makes sense. So suspension, we've already talked about why the front needs to be higher than the rear. Spring stiffness, I don't want. So softer rear springs brings the rear balance back towards understeer. Tune to find yours and the car's ideal handling balance. A little brain fart here, guys. So we want to increase oscillations by reducing stiffness accordingly, which increases damping ability for tire contact. And then we need to remember our weight distribution, right? We have more weight over the front of the car. So the front springs naturally need to have just a little bit more stiffness to act as helper springs to the dampening. I keep saying dampening, but it's damping. Dampeners. I've been starting to learn a little bit more about these dampeners. I think in the beginning I had everything by default, and then I ticked everything in the front up. But then I came back and I started reading a little bit more. You do want to have a little more front dampening because you have the weight of the engine over the front. But let's kind of take a deep dive into what some of these mean. Slow bump. So increasing slow bump dampening strengthens the force opposing wheel bump, helping slow down body movements. You want this. Slow rebound. Increasing the setting raises the force opposing suspension extension, which helps control body movements by slowing them down, resulting in improved stability and handling. Sounds great. However, high slow rebound dampening can also prevent the suspension from extending quickly enough to maintain tire grip in response to driver input. If you are having a ton of tire contact loss on bumpy stages, or like for instance this circuit, you need to turn down slow rebound so that the car can just snap right back down to the surface easier. Fast bump. Increasing this setting slows down the suspension's compression by adding more resistance, reducing oscillations, and improving control. However, too high a fast bump setting can cause a pumping effect where the suspension feels underdampened despite being overdampened, resulting in most compression being absorbed by the tire sidewall, which offers minimal dampening. It can also amplify the feeling of larger bumps on rougher terrain by not allowing the suspension to compress quickly enough to absorb the impact. Typically, bump dampening is set lower than rebound dampening because the spring force is opposing. So this is set down because I'm trying to get it to snap down. Fast rebound. Increasing the setting raises the force opposed to suspension extension, which helps to slow down and better control wheel oscillations. This creates a firmer response, improving stability. But as we know, every time we improve stability, we are going to lose tire contact and grip. So I've turned this down. Bump threshold. Increasing bump transition delays the opening, making suspension maintain higher dampening during rapid vibrations, improving stability, but potentially increasing tire contact loss. Tire contact loss, tire contact loss, tire contact loss. So I've gone through these and I have been bumping them down to where it feels like I have the most tire contact and decent stability. The same thing with this one. You'll read increasing rebound transition value will delay the opening, maintaining higher dampening during fast vibrations, improving stability, but potentially increasing tire contact loss. Tire contact loss. So as I've read through these, I have bumped and ticked down some of them that would cause the tire to not have contact. It's just bumping in the air and nothing's really allowing it to come down and touch the ground again. And I'll tell you what, as soon as you start getting these settings in line, there is no floatiness about this car whatsoever. I'm throwing hairpins very tight, and I'm like, wow, you mean I didn't slide out the back end? Axles. So anti-roll bar stiffness. Again, think about when the car is shifting side to side. If the stiffness is too tight from one to the other, then you're going to lose tire contact. And that's what you need to know there. Differentials. I have this set a little bit more different in the snow than I do in the gravel, and it's because the snow seems like it likes to kick out the rear a whole lot. So I've made this almost equal. So what this center to ratio to rear is doing is I'm trying to shift a little bit more power to the rear so the rear does kick out a little bit so that I don't have as much understeer. LSD power coast ramp. I have this set all the way to the right and the rear for snow because there is a crap ton of kick out. I have no issues with it whatsoever. And in the gravel, I have kind of moved this further to the left. Now I'll explain what's happening here. Basically, this is saying the tires can rotate at different speeds better. And this is important when cornering because the outside tires are going to want to rotate at a faster speed than the inside tires. So if you have this LSD power coast ramp set all the way to the right, you get maximum cornering manipulation through the speed of your tires, is how I will put it. If you put this back to 90-90, that means both of these rear tires are going to be forced to basically rotate at the same speed, just like a drift car with a welded diff, and you're going to be sideways the whole time, but it might not be the fastest way to get through the corner. Okay? So I would keep the front so that the front can rotate relatively loosely while applying the throttle, and then I would adjust this based off of how much kick out you like. LSD preload. Preload is especially important on loose surfaces, providing needed traction before differential fully locks. Provided necessary traction before differential fully locks. So again, fully locked differential means that the tires are not able to rotate at different speeds. You're fully locking both tires to rotate at the same speed, which means it's not going to have the same cornering capability. This is probably why some of the cars are labeled as floaty, because if you have too much of the tires locking, that what happens is all four tires just start spinning the same speed, and it's like you're on a flying carpet, floating through the turn. Wheels, I think we've gone through this. Oh, don't forget about the force feedback multiplier. I think it's intentional that they have reduced the force feedback of the cars and so that you can tune it up and break your own thumb, because I promise you this car ripped the steering wheel out of my hand and I went from 1.75 back down to 1.65. Tune it to how you like it. Some of these cars, they come with electronic steering. I think it's later generations. I can't remember, R5, Rally 2, whatever it is, which was designed to reduce the feedback coming through to the wheel so that real rally racers didn't have to worry about breaking their thumb while hitting a bump at 90 miles an hour. But again, that's an electronic thing. So I do feel like within those cars, they had an ability to tune up, albeit it may have been a slight delay, the feedback, but not direct hydraulic through to the hands. But I do believe that they were able to tune it up so they could get the feel that they wanted. Brakes, the other super really important part about tuning brakes, right? So 60% to 65%. When I press the brakes and I have weight transfer over the front of the car and I have now a weight distribution of 60-65%, that means I can apply a whole lot more braking force to the front than I can to the rear without locking up the tires. I can get this car to basically stop like on a dime. So what I've done here is I've gone and I've changed the front pads to be soft so they have a little bit more bite. I haven't done anything with the discs yet. I have no idea what's going on here. I'll get there at some point. Front cylinder. I think if you read, increasing the mass of cylinder's value will reduce the line pressure, decreasing brake power. So I ticked the front cylinder down a couple more. I think 2 ticks, because I'm not worried about the front locking up. Actually, it really doesn't lock up. I have front brake bias set to 62%, and then I left the rear all the same because it's fine. And then nothing done here. That's basically it, guys. Go out there and have fun. I want some competition. Knock me off the leaderboard, if you will. But it's been fun kind of learning how to tune these cars, but also learning more about them and asking Claude AI about these cars. And if you do decide to go down the rabbit hole of AI, I would suggest being very specific with it. Tell it you're playing AC Rally and that you want it to scrub sim advice and you want it to compare it to real life advice, like how was the car really built and what would the rally racers really experience and feel and how did they have to change their style of driving, etc. And you'll learn very many fascinating things, and it will help you to better understand what's going on with each of these cars. So to recap, remember, go run laps to learn how to tune the car and then take that tuning experience and apply it to stages. Go run laps. Don't think about the turns. Think about how the car feels and what could potentially be holding you back. Right? Number 2, read about the car. Where's the engine? Where's all of your weight? Remember, your weight affects so much in your tuning. Your brake bias, suspension bias, and aero bias are the 3 main things that need to be in line with your weight bias. Otherwise, the car will handle like shit, promise. 4th thing, pay attention to where the peak torque is of the car and adjust the differentials in the gearbox to maintain that 4,000 to max RPM range. It does not matter if you're not making it to 6th gear. What matters is that you are in the proper power band of the car when you're going through the gears. Who cares if you were in 2nd gear the whole time? And I think that's really it. Oh yeah, the wheels. Pay attention when an update comes out and the wheels start heating up and changing the tire PSI. Pay attention to that, and then come back here and adjust your wheels accordingly. Other than that, have fun. This put me 20th. I want to see you guys move me down. I hope your laps go swimmingly. Twinkle toes out.
If you made it this far, thank you for watching. And always, please like and subscribe. And also, feel free to check out some of my other content. And stay grinding, folks.